episode of ShiftEd. We're coming in from Learn Quebec here, and I'm reaching out to a Canadian across the way, George Couros, who has come in to talk to us a little bit about education, ed tech, change, shifting practices, and on and on and on. So, George, welcome to our humble podcast here.
Yeah, well, and Chris, thanks for having me. I don't know if you know this based on the introduction, but I am originally from a small town in Saskatchewan, and unfortunately, everybody knows it because of a tragedy that happened there. It's Humboldt, Saskatchewan, which I'm very proud to be of that town. And then I lived in Alberta for the last 20 years, but my family and we moved to Orlando, Florida. So I don't know if you know that. So I'm talking to you out of Florida right now.
Lucky man.
March, and I'm wearing shorts. And if I never see snow ever again, I miss the people, but I do not miss the snow.
Yeah, I agree with you. We just thought we escaped winter, right? We were like, oh, wow, nice. Spring's here. And the last 2 days have just been atrocious. Like winter came back with a punch to the nose. Well, so we're up here in cold Montreal.
If you really want to, I escaped winter. Right, forever. So I escaped winter.
It's possible.
And we've been here long enough where it's I think it's 25 degrees out and I'm wearing a hoodie. So I'm like, what is wrong with me? But
that's great. Yeah. Good, I love it. So George, why don't we start off just with a little bit of history of your history? How did you get into helping teachers and helping administrators kind of look at through different lenses of education? How did that all come to be for you?
Well, it's interesting because I've had very different roles. I actually trained to become a kindergarten teacher and had a kindergarten interview and thought I actually crushed it. This is my very first interview in education, and they seemed to really like me. And then they said, "Hey, we decided to go with someone else," and I was like, "That's weird." Like I was like, pretty confident. They seemed really appreciative. And then I called them about 2 weeks after and I said, "Hey, I'm new to the profession. I'm trying to get better." And they said, "Well, actually, we were going to call you today because we wanted to offer you a high school technology position." So I was like, "Really?" So it was interesting because the interview went really well. I had made like a website in university. I went to University of Saskatchewan and they kept asking me about it over and over again. And so based on the interview, they knew they were going to have a high school technology position open, but they couldn't advertise it yet. And so they kept asking me because they're like, this is the guy. And it was like amazing because I had such a little knowledge of technology, but a little knowledge of technology in 1999 was an abundance, right? Like I was like way ahead of people at the time. So I took the job a little bit reluctantly because I'm like, I am not prepared to teach high school. And I actually remember I talked to my cooperating teacher. She said, "Take the job," which is fascinating because we have a teacher shortage. And at that time it was like, you will be lucky if you get a job, like how the world has changed. And I took it basically saying I don't even know I do not understand the content I would teach. So I would go in a little bit earlier in the day than when school started. And then I actually, I would learn the stuff about an hour ahead of when I was supposed to teach it. And it was really, it was a really good experience for me because in the classroom, we're learning technologies and you can have a massive amount of knowledge, but there's way more that you don't know. And that's reality. So I would say to the students in high school, I'm like, "Hey, does anyone know how to do this?" And they're like, I do. So it really kind of put me in a space where immediately I was very comfortable learning from other people, including my students. And it's something and you see when you actually create a space where students feel that they have something to contribute to the space, that they actually make not only the other students, but the teacher better, how much more empowered they feel and how much better of an experience that is. So that actually just shifted. And then I took that, very temporary job. And then I actually ended up teaching elementary for school and took that mentality. So I've really, even in my, I'm not in the classroom right now. I'm not in school. I'm independent in my work. But my mentality is I don't ever talk about teaching because I do not feel it's my place to tell teachers how to teach. But I do talk about learning, and that's in all aspects of our lives. And I always default to the people that I work with like I'm not the expert. I'm just a guy sharing ideas. You are the ones who are to find the solution because you know your community better. You know who this is. And so, I've done basically K-12, taught there, vice principal, principal, central office, and then and now I have the blessing to work all over the world and work with schools, work with organizations, work outside. And there's like actually a lot of businesses that I'm starting to work with because COVID said, hey, like we need to figure out how to learn, and who better to teach people how to learn than educators. And I'm very proud that we've always looked at, in education, we've always looked at business and try to learn from them. But the adverse hasn't been true. And I think businesses are starting to say like, hey, we need to like see what education do because they're the experts in learning. So that's the focus. So yeah, I've kind of been all over the place. I actually liken myself to you see I have some Canadian roots, the littlest hobo. Do you remember that show?
Yeah.
You know, I kind of go into a place, hopefully make it better, and then leave pretty quick. And it's like, where's that dog going?
Off to a new adventure.
Who knows where the episode is? Yeah. So I appreciate that I could tell that story because I've tried to share that in the U.S. and nobody knows what I'm talking about. But I know people here will understand that story.
That's warm to our heart for sure.
Yeah. If you don't know the theme of Littlest Hobo and you're Canadian, I've lost a little respect for you.
You got troubles. So, George, I know a lot of your work also deals with helping change occur from the top levels all the way down. Yep. Now, what's your viewpoint on the system that education is, in the sense that it's really slow to change? Yep. When you look at the big picture of it all, we tend to do what we've done for the past, since the Industrial Revolution. Where do you start supporting systems that want to change, but just aren't sure how to go about doing it?
Yeah, I think one of the things right away is a conversation about, like, a lot of people blame the system like it's the Wizard of Oz, like it's someone standing behind a curtain and we have no say. And getting people to understand, like, hey, you are the system. Like, because it's like, it's easy, like, to say, like, oh, I've seen, superintendents, director generals say, like, oh, I wish we could do this. I'm like, you're the literal boss. So like what are you talking about, right? And and kind of sharing this. And so I actually think one of the biggest issues, I don't want to say issues, but obstacles we face is we are really trying to change the experience for students in the classroom, but then we are really holding on to old aspects of leadership. And, I have tons of conversations with like state, provincial level organizations, and they're like, we really want our teachers to, try different things, be open to taking risks. I'm like, okay, so let's talk about your event. Like, so I'm coming to speak at your event. So I know you've traditionally done this and you have this kind of schedule. You do this, you do this. How about we change this? No. I'm like, this is the issue, is that you're asking people to change, but you're saying, but it has to be within the parameters of the things that we've always done. So how do we actually, for example, change the experience of, teachers for their own learning, right? What does that look like? So like, really quick example. Let's say you go to a conference. Typically people go to conferences. They actually, have a keynote, then 15 minutes. You got to get to your next session because we got to like fill that day with learning. And then, you might have a 10-minute break. You might get 30 minutes for lunch, blah, blah, blah. And it's like the same, like what if you actually had an event where someone was speaking? Because I think content's really important. And then you actually gave people like 35, 40 minutes to talk, to have conversations about it, to actually dig in. And, like one of the things that I've done for years, I've worked at conferences, and people say, I'll say, what was the best part of that event? It was the conversations in the hallway with my colleagues, right? Then we don't actually intentionally make that time. So if you really want things to change in the classroom, we have to think about how they change at the administrator level. And that's a lot of my work right now, is actually getting them to look at, what are some of the problems that we're complaining about that we're also creating. So for example, mental health, huge thing, right? So what have leaders done? They're like, hey, we're going to take a PD day. What we're going to do is we're going to, we're going to do like our learning and stuff like that. And then we're going to have a yoga class, to alleviate some of your stress. And it's like, hey, why don't you actually just not cause the problem? And then so I don't have to do yoga. So like, why don't we look at what's causing the problem instead of like saying, hey, we're causing this problem and here's an hour of yoga to solve it. It's like, I'm not a big yoga person. Can we just fix the problem? So I think that to me is like, I truly believe, and, I believe teachers, so close to kids are the most important aspect of, of education, obviously. But if your leadership is bad, that's where a lot of problems stem, because your great teachers end up leaving or getting worse. And, the ones that aren't necessarily as great tend to stay. And I don't think anyone does better from that. So I think it is a leadership issue, and, bombardment of initiatives, and, we want to be on the cutting edge of everything. So when we try everything new and we don't actually focus on what we've done in the past to become better at, that causes some of the issues as well.
For sure. And George, like what makes kids learn better? What kind of environments are created? Because, a question to you as well is like, kids tend to kids have learned the way they've learned from the dawn of time, right? Like, sure. Do you think that kids nowadays learn differently than they did 20, 30, 40 years ago?
I don't necessarily think they've learned differently. I think they have access to different things, right? And so, think about, and I'm dating myself here. I'm 48 years old, and we'd have, hey, you got to do some homework in math, but don't look at the back. Right. Don't copy the answers in the back, and then you'd copy the answers in the back because you had to get your homework done. And so why would you do that? Because you never, as a student, you didn't see the value. Like, if you didn't see the value of something, but now it's not, you don't have to worry about looking in the back. They can just do a ChatGPT, this AI thing, blah, blah, blah. So again, if they don't see the value of it, I still actually write my own blog, and not many people have blogs anymore. And I don't write it because I'm trying to build an audience. I write it because I see the value of actually writing for my own learning. And so I don't think this is a student thing. I think it's an adult thing. Do we actually see value in the work that we're doing? And so the other thing that I know that we need to get better at, and I'm not saying we as in educate, I'm including myself, is how do you actually start with a place of where people are focused really on what someone does really well, and starting from that place, not ignoring their weaknesses, just starting with strengths. And I actually wrote about this in Innovator's Mindset, which I thought was fascinating. Years ago, the PISA scores come out in Ontario. And then basically there's a news article, and it focused on, it was interesting because I remember it saying like, scores in literacy in Ontario go up while math goes down, right? So then I read the article, zero mentions of literacy, none. It's all like, you suck at math, you suck at math, you suck at math. And then what happens with that is then all the superintendents or directors or whatever they're called in Ontario feel this pressure from the public. They then have to put math into everything. And then they're like, hey, we suck at math. We suck at math. And the teachers are like, hey, we suck at math. And then they hammer the kids. We suck at math. We suck at math. And then it's like, why is everyone feeling so defeated in education? Right? Oh, because we're like hearing from every level that we suck. Where the first thing that I challenged is, the first thing that should have came out of that article, and our first inclination should have been, hey, we're really good at literacy. What are we doing there? Like, what are we doing there that is actually, so a lot of times when we talk about this strengths-based approach, we ask our teachers to look for the strengths of our kids while constantly focusing on what they can't do. And so there is tons of evidence and research that actually focusing on person's strengths not only makes them better, it actually helps them develop their weaknesses as well. So if you say to me, like, hey, like your arms are really ripped, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go work my arms a little bit extra, right? Like I want to like that better, but then I'm whatever things I do to work out, well, I'll also help the entire rest of my body or my cardiovascular system and stuff like that too. But if you constantly set on all the areas that are weak for me, you kind of feel deflated. And this is what we're doing to our staff. This is what we're doing. So like, how are we actually starting with, places where people feel valued? And I think that we want this for our students. We have to focus on how we do this with the people that serve them.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's kind of this battle going on nowadays too, right? Like content versus like skills, getting kids kind of ready for this unknown future. What do you think that we can push a little bit more of the mindset of skill-based, that those are really, really important? I mean, we talk about them all the time, the problem solving, the collaboration, but it always seems to be like trumped by content, like we got to know stuff.
Yeah.
How do you kind of, straddle those two, the skills versus content area?
Well, I think even just using the terminology versus is the problem. I think that's one of the things we have to kind of go away from. And I don't know if I've ever told this story on video. When I wrote Innovator's Mindset, there was a parent in our community that was basically, this is right before I wrote it, who is like, innovation's the worst and you're wrecking kids and like we need to go back to the basics and all this other stuff. So I was like, oh my God, as soon as my book comes out, she's going to like go after me, right? Like she's going to find this book, and because it was actually someone in Alberta. So I actually started looking at her stuff and I was like, I actually agree with a lot of what she's saying, but what are we leaving out? So for example, like I'm known for talking about innovation, but I think basic skills are really important. I might sound like, kind of an old timer here. I actually think kids need to know their times tables. Like, I actually don't think it's the worst thing. I think, and like, I have no issue with spelling tests. And, when people say to me this, well, you know what? Kids don't need spell tests because, they have like spell checking, right? And I'm like, well, you kind of got to be in the vicinity of the word. Like, you got to be a little bit close. Right. So I think one of the things that we can do in education, better is that, yes, of course, we want to focus on innovation and actually develop these skills, but also make sure that we don't ignore. And I actually don't think any teachers are ignoring the basics, but we ignore talking about it with our communities and talk about this and saying like, hey, these are things that we are really focusing on so that we can so for example, hey, we want kids to be able to read and write so that eventually they have the ability and interest to actually end up writing a book, right? But what we often talk about is just writing the book. And then you're like, well, kids can't even read and write. It's like, no. So we forgot to share this really important part. So the analogy that I make with this oftentimes, because I think, and like I work with a lot of high school people and they really appreciate this because, high school is very content heavy. And then they're like, hey, they're like, well, you know what? We get tested on content. So you can say whatever you want, but we still get tested on this. So the analogy that I use all the time is that if you think of the best jazz musicians in the world, what they're known for is their ability to improvise, that they can they can read what's going on, with their colleagues as they're playing music, and they'll just start changing stuff on the fly. And, you can go to the same, band, 5 nights in a row, and it'll be totally different based on the mood of the room and stuff like this. But their ability to improvise, their ability to create on the fly is because they know the basics of their instrument inside out. And so that I think is where we kind of have to kind of go away from this, because I'm trying not to be part of this problem, but I was. Is that it was like the basics versus innovation, as opposed to we actually have to have our kids understand the basics so they can do those innovative things and they can go to this, right? And, like a lot of stuff with AI, I do have concerns that you're like, I saw someone posting like, hey, you have this thing and it will create your curriculum for you. And like, it will save you so much time. And I'm like, oh, that's great. So I can just fire the curriculum department and then pay $9.99 a month. And have that. And so like, what do we bring to the table? And so one of the things that I've really been focusing on is how do we actually create schools where students learn to attain knowledge so that they can develop wisdom. And one of my favorite quotes, and this is like an unknown quote, is that, knowledge is understanding that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is understanding that a tomato would be terrible in a fruit salad. And I'm like, that's a great way to look at it.
It works.
Right? That's a great way to look at it.
For sure.
So that I think we have to get away from this either or versus, but saying like, yeah, these things are really important. And Yang Zhao, and I went on forever. Yang Zhao basically said in a sentence, he said, reading and writing should be the floor, not the ceiling. And I think that's the mentality that I'm trying to embrace with this.
I love that. I love your analogy too. That's a great one.
Yeah, it's helpful. No, I wish it was mine. This is mine. Yeah. So, but I think it does make such a good point. When I heard it, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. George, what about, I was reading some of what you were talking about digital leadership. So kind of the innovations we have, and how do you get people going in the same direction? Because technology will never stop, right? Sure. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be in the conversation, or it should be. But how do you lead people towards innovation to support their student learning?
Yeah, so I think for me, like people ask this forever, just because of the work that I do and what I write about. They'll say like, what do you see happening in 5 years? And if you asked me this question 5 years ago, and if you ask me this question 5 years from now, my answer will be exactly the same. I have no clue, and neither do you. And so that is actually like, we have to embrace this. When everyone calls themselves a futurist, I'm like, whatever. You're selling something, right? So like, I'm a little leery of that. But for me, the focus is, so there is a part two to that. I have no clue, and neither do you. But the part two is, but whatever comes my way, I'll figure it out. And I think, like I go back to the beginning of this podcast, that was instilled in me right away. Is like, I don't know how to teach this, but I'm going to figure it out. And that might mean me going in an hour early. That might mean me asking the students who seem to know this way better than me, and I'm teaching it, but whatever. And so like tapping into people that, bring different knowledge as well. So I think the mentality is, how do you develop schools that truly empower students so they don't need the teacher? They don't need this. And so, going back to what we talked about with professional learning experiences, a lot of times what we do is we create dependent teachers. Like we've done like, hey, here's this app, go to file, go to new, and we step by step. And like half the teachers are like, are you kidding me? Like, this is such a waste of time. I know how to do this. And then 30% of like other teachers are saying, like, okay, seriously, like this guy's going too fast. I can go as slow as possible. It's too fast. And then 20% are like, I don't care. I'm retiring. So I'm just going to sit through this. So what I try to focus on is I'll show people like, hey, here's this thing. I don't show them how to use it. I try to show value. And then you try to create, if they see value, they're more likely to learn it. But we do the step-by-step tutorial, but we don't actually show what the value is, right? So you know how to use it. You just don't know why you ever would. So I think we have to kind of start getting people to see value in the things that we're doing, why this is important, that they want to learn it on their own. And that ultimately is the best thing you can do for your students and yourself. That whatever comes your way, you'll figure it out, right? Like we're learning piano. My daughter, so I'm 48 and my daughter's 7. I bought a piano for Christmas. We're both learning it at the same time. And I want to learn alongside with her. And we downloaded an app, started using it. And I'm sitting on the TV or I'm sitting watching TV and she's playing piano. And she said, Dad, hey, like, I don't know how to get to this. I'm like, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to like press buttons until you figure it out. Because I've never used the app either. So like I'm doing nothing different than you. And we have to be comfortable to say to our kids, yeah, you figure it out. Like, I'm not going to show you everything, because then what do you do if I get up and then I do it all for her and I like walk her through, then she learns the next time she gets, just call over Dad. I'm like, nah, so you figure it out. I'm going to do whatever, you know what I'm going to do? What you're going to do. Press buttons until it works. So
that's right.
Yeah. And then, so like, we have to be comfortable. We have to be comfortable with that too. Right. Cause I'm like I said, it was a brand new app to me. So, and she knows, like, it's funny because she knows, like, yeah, if if he doesn't know and I don't know, then we're in the same position, and I know how to learn it, and that's what I'm trying to teach my kids. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that it always comes back to the learning aspect, right? And teachers being students, always kind of pushing yourself forward continuously.
Yep.
Well, George, I want to thank you for this. It's been it's a fast podcast, but man, a lot of ideas were shared in this short time. I really appreciate your words and some of your quotes. And people out there, if you haven't read any of George's books, you better do it because they're amazing. And thanks for popping in from sunny Florida. Envy is still in my body, but I'll try to get over it.
Well, the sunshine, the sunshine inspires these ideas, right? Right. That's what happens.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Chris. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me on, Chris.